Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board framework, you know it as SASB, specifically the one designed for iron and steel producers. If you're operating in the compliance or ESG space for heavy industry, well, you already know that not all metrics are created equal, right? So we're going to zero in on two of the absolute most critical, high-stakes areas of disclosure for this sector: workforce health and safety and supply chain management.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 1. Risks in iron and steel. 2. Workforce health and safety. 3. Calculating key safety metrics. 4. Direct versus contract employees. And finally, 5. Supply chain risk mitigation. We'll be breaking down the exact formulas and the qualitative reporting requirements you need to know.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it lays out the entire landscape of SASB sustainability disclosure topics for the industry. But I want you to pay close attention to the bottom two rows. That's exactly where our focus lies today. First, you've got workforce health and safety, which relies heavily on quantitative rate-based metrics. And right below it, supply chain management, which is categorized as discussion and analysis. So while one demands really rigorous mathematical tracking, the other requires a detailed narrative of your risk management procedures. Let's look at why both of these are just so important.
Starting off with Section 1, Risks in Iron and Steel. Let's set the stakes here.
Before we get into the heavy math, we really need to set the stakes for why precise measurement of these metrics is absolutely critical to corporate managers, your stakeholders, and of course, investors. We have to ground these technical reporting standards in the physical reality of the work itself. I mean, iron and steel production processes present significant daily risks to employees and contractors. We are literally talking about environments defined by extreme heat, molten metal, and massive heavy machinery. Because of this inherently hazardous environment, the industry has historically faced relatively high injury and fatality rates. And when accidents happen, the fallout goes way beyond the immediate, terrible tragedy. Worker injuries and fatalities result in severe regulatory penalties, widespread negative publicity, plummeting worker morale, lost productivity, and dramatically increased healthcare and compensation costs. So a strong safety culture isn't just an ethical imperative here, it's a core operational necessity.
Moving on to Section 2, Workforce Health and Safety. We're looking at three key metrics here.
To monitor exactly how well a company is managing its hazardous environment, SASB requires the reporting of three specific safety metrics: TRIR, fatality rate, and NMFR. Let's define them real quick. The total recordable incident rate, or TRIR, tracks work-related injuries and illnesses. But what actually counts as recordable? Well, under the SASB standard, it's any incident resulting in death, days away from work, restricted work, or a transfer to another job. Crucially, it also includes any incident requiring medical treatment beyond basic first aid, which is defined as emergency care before regular medical aid can be provided. Next up is the fatality rate, which pretty straightforwardly tracks work-related deaths. Finally, we have the near-miss frequency rate, or NMFR. Now this one is fascinating because it tracks what almost happened. A near miss is defined as an unplanned or uncontrolled event that didn't result in injury or damage, but absolutely had the potential to do so in other circumstances. Tracking near misses is vital because it reveals the hidden hazards in a plant before they turn into actual recordable injuries.
Which brings us to Section 3, Calculating Key Safety Metrics. Let's get into the standardized formulas.
Okay, now that we know what we're tracking, we need to understand exactly how to calculate the rates required for the disclosure. SASB demands a standardized formula so investors can confidently compare safety performance apples to apples across different companies. And that standardized formula hinges entirely on this magic number, 200,000. So where does this number actually come from? It's basically a baseline representation of working hours. Specifically, 200,000 represents the total number of hours that 100 full-time workers would provide annually if they worked 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year. By anchoring a calculation to this 200,000-hour baseline, the metric normalizes the data. That allows a massive global steel producer to be accurately and fairly compared to a much smaller regional foundry.
So the crucial point is how these elements actually come together in the official SASB formula. First, you take your statistic count. Let's say the total number of recordable incidents you had in a given year. Step 2, you multiply that count by our baseline of 200,000. Finally, step 3, you divide that result by the total number of actual hours worked by all employees during that reported year. And here's the kicker. This exact same formula is applied to calculate your TRIR, your fatality rate, and your NMFR.
All right, Section 4, direct versus contract employees. Let's talk about employee classifications.
Now, you can't just lump all your workers together into one giant equation. SASB has a very strict requirement that you must track and report these calculated rates separately for two distinct workforce groups. And I think this brilliantly illustrates the true depth of responsibility companies hold today. You must report rates for direct employees separately from contract employees. Direct employees are pretty straightforward. These are individuals directly on your payroll, whether they're full-time, part-time, seasonal, or salaried executives. But pay really close attention to contract employees. These are individuals who are not on your payroll, but whom your entity supervises or manages. This includes independent contractors and people employed by third parties, like temp agencies or labor brokers. The standard is incredibly clear here. If you supervise them in your work environment, you are responsible for tracking and reporting their health and safety metrics just as rigorously as your direct hires. You simply cannot outsource your safety reporting obligations.
Let's move to Section 5, Supply Chain Risk Mitigation, and see how this builds.
Let's see how this builds from the internal safety of the steel mill to the external risks found deep in the supply chain. You see, steel production doesn't happen without critical raw materials, primarily iron ore and coking coal. And the extraction of these materials are incredibly resource-intensive processes. Mineral extraction often carries massive environmental and social impacts that can severely affect local communities, workers, and entire ecosystems. SASB requires a detailed qualitative discussion on the sourcing risks associated with these exact issues. You must disclose any projected risks or constraints in obtaining those raw materials. This means discussing how restricted availability, volatile political situations, poor local labor conditions, natural disasters, or shifting climate change regulations might disrupt your supply chain. Think about it. If your mining supplier faces community protests or legal action due to their environmental practices, your raw materials stop flowing. Worse, you might be subject to regulatory penalties yourself just by association. To mitigate these massive operational and reputational risks, SASB requires you to discuss the specific policies and procedures you use to manage your suppliers. It is not enough to just say you care about the environment. You must detail your actual risk management procedures. This includes how you use supplier screening, the enforcement of your vendor codes of conduct, and your reliance on certifications. Crucially, the standard highlights the use of audits. You have to disclose whether you're using internal first-party audits, bringing in independent third parties, or utilizing audits administered by peer trade organizations to ensure your suppliers aren't engaging in illegal or damaging practices.
Which brings us to the ultimate question you really have to ask yourself after reviewing this standard. Are your supplier screening processes robust enough to withstand public ESG reporting? Whether it's meticulously calculating incident rates for a temporary contractor on your factory floor or auditing the environmental impact of an iron ore mine halfway across the world, the SASB standard demands total operational transparency. It shows that managing risk isn't just about protecting the bottom line today, it's about proving you literally have the systems in place to be sustainable tomorrow. Take a hard look at your data collection and your vendor policies and make absolutely sure you're ready to report. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.